So great to be here to have the opportunity to speak to you all, and thanks for such a nice introduction. And really, as I've been getting ready for this presentation, it's really been difficult to try to make sense of what's exactly been going on with the teacher workforce, I think, in this really unique circumstances that we're in. So I'll try to wade into, I think, some of the mixed evidence that we do see, but then I think more importantly speak to where we can move from here, really trying to think about solutions both in the short and long term. For the title, as I'll elaborate on in a little more detail after a couple of slides, thinking about whether we're seeing warning bells or false alarms as a mean to understand and respond to mixed signals in the post-pandemic teacher workforce. So first, I know the exact numbers are a little bit tricky to read with this figure, but really I think what's most important is the trend line here. So this is from data compiled by Josh Bleiberg and Matt Kraft, looking across 16 states to try to get as close as we can to a picture of what's happening to teacher turnover, at least in the first couple of years of the pandemic. So this is looking at data from the 17-18 school year into the 2020-2021 school year. So really we don't have strong data of even what's happened to our most recent year. But even to that point, really what the trend that we're seeing is that there hasn't been a clear mass exodus out of teaching, despite, I think, some expectations that might be what we would have seen. That really we do see a high degree of stability, at least to this point. On the flip side, though, teachers are clearly sounding the alarm about stress, burnout, dissatisfaction, and working conditions within their schools. So then I think, again, as we'll hear more with other presenters today as well, we have this really, I think, tricky spot where, again, maybe if we're looking at turnover alone, we're not seeing huge jumps, but the teachers are really starting to, again, express a high degree of concern. I want to highlight a couple of data points that have really stuck out to me throughout the last year in particular. Both from surveys from January of this year, the first of which from researchers at the RAND Corporation, that found that 73% of teachers felt frequent job-related stress compared to just 35% of other working age adults. So obviously there's just something distinct going on with teachers about the conditions of teaching that are really driving a higher degree of stress than other occupations at the same time. And then second, a survey from the National Education Association, a data point that I think has gotten a lot of attention here around that over half, that 55% of teachers reported that the pandemic has made them more likely to leave teaching than they had previously planned. So I think we're a little bit at a tricky spot of what to make of some of this data so far, though. Again, is this warning bells or are these false alarms? Again, does it seem like once the pandemic recedes, some of the stressors on teachers are maybe in the background? Will we see some of the high levels of burnout that we've heard about over the last couple of years recede as well? Or are we going to be, again, in a position that these are just warning bells? This is a sign of worse to come, and it's something to really be thinking about planning for right now. So I think now more than ever, really, the question that we really need to contend with is how can we create the teaching conditions that are both supportive of current teachers, but also attractive to prospective teachers. And as I hope will be explicit as I'm talking through that often we try to make this distinction about teacher recruitment and retention. The two are so intimately tied to one another that we often want to be able to talk about the two in tandem. And that's really what I'll be speaking about today. So when we're talking about creating supportive teaching conditions, the main framework that I'll be proposing is really a data-driven and evidence-driven approach to addressing teacher staffing challenges. I think with this, it's a way that we can try to make small but meaningful changes to how we both recruit and retain teachers. At the same time, I think it's really important to emphasize that this isn't an area where we see clear silver bullets. It's not something that's going to have easy fixes in the short term, that again, there might be short-term things that we can do, but it's also then planning for the future, planning for how we can make things that might lead to more sustainable changes. At the same time, I don't want to lose sight of some of the deeper challenges that do exist within the teacher workforce. And again, I think if we take a very technocratic approach to trying to make improvements, it can really pull away from this. And again, so I think there's sort of two risks that I at least want to flag, and then I'll come back to these at the end of the presentation. First of which, if again, a public conversation is only around areas of shortage, dissatisfaction, the stress that teachers face, I do have concerns about what this does for teacher recruitment. If it, again, for folks that are maybe considering coming into teaching and what they see in the news or what they hear is just how difficult the job is, that even those who are teaching are just having such trouble, it does raise questions about whether that's a job that they would like to pursue. So I think that's one we definitely have to keep in the back of our minds. The second, I think, is just even this broader, more societal issue of the degree to which we value teachers, which is then tied to their status in society, how they're compensated. And again, if we're focusing, I think, narrowly on some of these just minor issues, we can sometimes lose this broader question that we also, I think, need to work to keep in the forefront. So as I'd said, even though the majority of my presentation will really be talking about some of these more technical things that I think we can be doing perhaps a little bit better. At the end, I'll be coming back to this question of maybe how can we reframe some of these questions around teacher staffing to really maybe put teaching in a little bit different light. So again, the three main steps that I'll be talking about in terms of what I think school and district leaders can be doing to address staffing problems. First relates to just quantifying the exact nature of staffing problems. Second, from there, again, drawing on data to really understand what the nature of those problems are. What are the root causes? What's actually driving the challenges that we do face? Importantly, I think when we're taking a much more data-driven approach, it's to really emphasize that, again, even though there might be common challenges that we have across schools, that often these are highly localized. We often think of teacher labor markets as just really localized around, again, particular regions, particular cities, maybe even clustered around preparation programs. With that, then the challenges that schools and districts do face can be really localized as well, and really needed to understand what the exact nature of these more local challenges are. Upon this basis then of developing really tailored recruitment and retention programs as the final piece here. So first, in terms of quantifying staffing problems, I think this is an incredibly important first step, one that I've seen when we've been hearing these conversations around teacher shortages throughout the summer. I think often gets missed in ways that I think makes it difficult to actually respond to this challenge. Using the example of shortages in particular, it's not always immediate what the issue is, what we're actually able to do, what we're able to respond to when we're talking about shortages. Shortages in particular, this can be a result of just, we have a lot of vacancies, which again could have been a result of the high number of teachers that we're leaving. It can also relate to more supply issues of just how many applicants were coming in. But when we're not always drawing these distinctions, it's unclear whether we're going to really, again, target retention efforts more or target recruitment efforts more. So really having data to support, again, how we're going to set priorities to inform some of these decisions is really important. So again, by no means exhaustive, but just want to give a couple examples, I think, of the type of data points that can be really helpful in terms of making some of these distinctions. So first, at a fairly high level, we might want to know about the number of applicants for each open position. Often this is sort of this immediate question of whether we just feel like we're even having enough applicants in the first place. I think more often, though, what we end up seeing is that it's not necessarily having that we don't have applicants, but those who are applying don't necessarily meet our specific staffing needs. So then this can be in terms of subject area or grade level. This might relate to district goals of recruiting more racially diverse teachers in the first place. But whatever it looks like, it's trying to find a way to not only quantify, okay, the overall degree with which we don't feel like we're having enough applicants in the door, but whether they're meeting our specific criteria that we need. Importantly, these first two really are focused on the hiring side, but obviously these have more downstream effects than on what we see in classrooms. Again, to Dean Spangler's opening remarks, this is one that I've heard comments from students in our leadership program at UF of, again, principals that hiring has maybe never been an easy part of their job, but by the time the school year starts, maybe even into the first week of school, that staffing is resolved, that it's something that is able to be pulled together. But this year, maybe that really hasn't been the case, of really having to draw on long-term substitutes to start off the year in a way that's just very unprecedented compared to years prior. So again, another really important data point we might want to look at is the percent of classrooms that aren't staffed by a full-time instructor, to really understand, okay, do some of our immediate hiring challenges, what are the ways in which they're going to potentially impact our students in terms of the quality of instruction that they might have available. Another way that I've heard then districts responding is related to class size. Again, you can imagine a middle school that was hoping to find that 8th grade math teacher that just didn't happen. So then rather than assign some students to long-term substitutes, maybe the approach is just to bump up class sizes as a way to make sure that all students still have a high-quality teacher that they're working with, but then maybe, again, the needs might vary in terms of wanting to, again, support teachers in other ways, whether that's through paraprofessionals or other support staff. And again, I don't want to, again, see these as exhaustive, also not mutually exclusive with one another. Often when we have, again, challenges in the hiring process, they cascade then in terms of how we're actually students' opportunities to learn in terms of their teachers. The next step, once we feel like we have a sense of what some of our staffing challenges are, is really trying to dig in with what the root cause is. Typically where we jump is to think, okay, we didn't have enough applicants, it must be an issue with supply, it must be an issue with pipeline. Where I would really urge is then, rather than jumping there first, of really thinking about retention. I think the reason for this is fairly straightforward, that again, we're working with teachers that we already have in the system. A much different problem than if we're trying to deal with a much more amorphous group of who might consider coming in, who might consider applying, than those that we already have within our buildings. And then here, I think importantly, when we're talking about teacher retention, this is an area that we don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel when we're looking for root causes of teacher retention challenges. This has been an area of extensive research over decades now, and again, I'm oversimplifying a bit, but I think the general pattern here is that, again, underprepared teachers, less experienced teachers, teachers working in higher poverty schools, again, schools that often experience more challenging working conditions, these are going to be the schools that teachers are most likely to leave from. And again, when we're talking about working conditions, it's things like whether I feel like I'm being supported by my administrators, whether I feel like I have the resources, materials to be successful. Again, for new teachers, whether there's the comprehensive supportive induction and mentoring program to really get your feet on the ground when you're starting off. I think most challenging, though, when we're talking about the types of causes of retention is that these various things are compounding, that they contribute to one another. We often see a subset of schools that tend to just have the highest turnover year in, year out. Again, these are schools that have the most vacancies, so having to hire the most teachers often leads to hiring new or more underprepared teachers in a way that is difficult to support when maybe there's not enough mentor teachers. So then again, that when you do bring new folks in, that maybe again they're not really getting going how we would want, leading to this revolving door cycle in a subset of schools. But to be then a little more specific about how we can link retention to some of the staffing challenges that we might have, I think a couple of examples help drive this point home. So again, you can imagine a district looking at their hiring data, find that of the 100 open teaching positions in the district, half had fewer than 5 applications. Again, so on its face, we could just clearly see this as an issue of supply. It's an issue of that there's just not enough teachers in the pipeline, not enough folks in our community who are interested in applying to these open teaching positions. But if we can take a step back, we can really, again, ask this question, well, why do we see so many vacancies in the first place? What subjects are the vacancies in? What schools are the vacancies in? Are these either subjects or schools where we saw a high degree of turnover last year among teachers who did leave these? Again, through exit surveys, why did they report leaving? There's a number of these different data points we can use to really drill in and try to understand in much richer ways about what teachers' reasons are for leaving in the first place. And then importantly, again, if we're able to more proactively address some of these challenges, are we able to decrease the degree of turnover which we experience in the first place that then just doesn't lead to as many vacancies moving forward? Again, we could also, again, have an example at the school level that I think makes this clear. So you can imagine a middle school with 5 math teachers in the school, 4 new to teaching, and then 3 of these new math teachers are out of field or uncertified. Again, we could treat this simply as a problem of supply, or we can ask, okay, well, what is it about the math problem that did have the, so many teachers leaving last year? Was this just an off year and we had a number of retirements and again we're not going to have this problem moving forward, or does it say something different about the high degree of resignations that we have out of our math department? Does this say something about the culture, the climate in this program that seems to be pushing teachers away? Does it reflect our hiring decisions in the past that we just keep relying on new teachers that we're really never able to adequately mentor or induct into our schools in a way that again we do see this cycle of turnover? But again, this is where we want to go first. I don't think this is a really natural response when we're looking at supply issues, but it's thinking how we can, again, more proactively address some of these retention challenges before immediately jumping to questions around recruitment. Obviously, there is an important recruitment piece here that also is worth emphasizing, worth noting. Here, if we're using this example around district vacancies, again, there's a number of important data points that we can bring in here to really elucidate like what the specific nature of the problem might be. Again, what are the positions that had too few applications? Often this isn't a universal problem, but we know there's particular subject areas in our districts and our schools that tend to have the highest degree of vacancies. But can we put data to that to really drill down on what our specific areas are? Again, this is often the case that it's not just overall concerns with vacancies, but maybe it's at particular schools. Are we really clear about what those schools are, which schools might require a different hiring supports? Another piece that's often overlooked here is just a question of timing. Were the positions that had too few applicants just posted later in the hiring cycle? And maybe this is a big factor that's driving why we didn't see as many. Again, all clear things we can tie data that's generally already available, but really to drill in about some of the root causes about what our staffing difficulties are, and importantly, as I'll talk about when we're getting then to some of the possible solutions, what steps we can take to actually really try to address some of these. Again, knowing that we are often constrained by both time and resources. So to this point, it's really trying to present a view that's, again, drawing on data that often already exists to really understand the root causes of teacher staffing problems. And just to reiterate, but I think this gets at that we don't sort of have this, again, overall broad teacher shortages across the board, even though there might be these high-level challenges. But the specific challenges tend to be really localized, and that's really why we want to unpack in our local context, like what's actually going on, what's the specific nature of our problem, and then how are we able to move forward and try to alleviate some of the more fundamental pieces that might be driving this in the first place. Again, this is the first step, but ultimately then as the basis for developing more targeted recruitment and retention programs. So when we're talking then about recruitment and retention, I think often where we go, and I think a really important first step, albeit a much more long-term approach, is thinking about how we can expand the pool of candidates. Often we want to think about this overall, just increasing teacher supply, increasing teachers in the pipeline, but we might also want to think about this for teachers with particular characteristics. Again, whether this is related to teacher racial diversity, whether this is related to areas that we tend to have high needs, whether that's in ESOL, special education, again, wherever it might be for unique contexts, but really trying to think of ways that we can just expand the pool, planning out for the future. I think one of the predominant approaches here that has been applied is various alternative certification programs, alternate entry pathways. I think one of the chief benefits here when we're thinking about alternative certification programs is just the degree of flexibility which they offer. Often, again, if they're able to be particularly set up within particular districts or really to address unique hiring needs. One of the examples that I like here is TNTP's Teacher Effectiveness and Certification Program, which again works in-house with districts to try to, again, first identify what the specific staffing needs are, and then to develop tailored recruitment and then support programs around supporting these teachers. And I think most importantly, if we're talking about alternative certification, often the concern is that, okay, if we maybe make it easier to come into teaching, that's going to increase supply. That second question is then whether they're going to stay. So often when we are going to try to flesh out or build out alternative certification programs, do we feel like we're including enough supports for teachers, not just getting them in the first place, but ensuring that they're going to be successful? I think promisingly, overall, when we're looking at various alternate entry pathways, do see that, again, I think promising findings in terms of increasing overall teacher supply, just also changing the composition of new teachers who do come into teaching, again, whether that's in terms of racial diversity or recruiting teachers into high-need subject areas. The second, which is getting then a lot of attention just in the past few years, although it's been one that's applied for decades now on and off, is grow your own programs. And when we're talking about grow your own programs, often we'll sometimes use some of the, again, same ways to certify teachers through alternate entry, but really make this distinction around trying to provide opportunities for folks to enter teaching who maybe haven't had opportunities previously. Often these will be rooted in social justice or racial justice initiatives to really try to increase local community contributions to the teacher workforce. Here I should say that, again, the evidence that we do have tends to be a little bit dated or generally based on small-scale studies. So overall, I don't think we have phenomenal empirical evidence on whether Grow Your Own programs really do meet some of the goals that we might hope. That said, the evidence that does exist, as I'll be talking about in a little more detail, I think is fairly promising here. The first of which, when we're talking about Grow Your Own programs, is really focused, again, really deep in the pipeline. If we're thinking about middle and high school pipeline programs that, again, work with students, often students of color or other students who maybe wouldn't have considered a career in teaching, to really say that this is an option. Again, you might not look like the majority of your teachers, but there's valuable ways that you can contribute to, again, your school, your community, by considering becoming teachers. As I had said, I think one of the difficulties here, just from a research vantage, these present a really long time horizon to be able to understand, again, whether we intervene with someone when they're a sophomore in high school, whether that's going to make a difference then in becoming a teacher, say, even several years later. So I don't think we have really good evidence on programs themselves. One way to try to get at this, I had a study that came out earlier this year using data from a school district in the Southeast, to really look at, okay, among students who did graduate from their high school in a district, return to teach in the same district, do we see evidence that they're more racially diverse, more effective, more likely to remain in teaching than other beginning teachers in the district? And here I think do see, again, as I described in the paper, really small but meaningful changes across these different outcomes. I think lending some credence to maybe increased efforts to try to recruit teachers locally. And then the second, and I think often when we think about grow your own programs, generally mapping on to both community and school pipelines. So what's been applied the longest is again, this question of how we can try to recruit paraprofessionals into full-time and teacher instructional roles. But increasingly we're seeing other options here around, again, maybe for substitute teachers, for other clerical staff. I've even had conversation with folks in districts in Florida that are working with school security guards who may be interested in entering teaching, particularly as a way to try to recruit more men into teaching in their districts. Again, we have, I think, promising evidence that some of these various grow your own programs can be successful, but lots of this, I think we're seeing a spot where just practice is ahead of research. A good example of this is in Tennessee now that has, again, based on residency programs at particular teacher preparation programs, really trying to flesh out a full apprenticeship model of teaching, where teachers, again, rather than having this more delayed model where it's school, student teaching, entering the classroom, of trying to integrate those throughout so that students who are in this apprenticeship program are then working under a master teacher while working towards their bachelor's in teacher certification. And importantly, in how they're designing their programs, of really trying to address then issues of the financial barriers that can exist for some people for becoming teachers as well, so that these candidates are both being compensated and then their tuition is being covered as part of the program. Again, I think just pointing towards just innovative ways that the districts are really trying to move the needle to try to address some of these really deep pipeline issues. And then lastly, in this vein, is around teacher scholarships, either overall or then minority teacher scholarship programs. Here again, with the same idea that particularly for low-income students who may be considering teaching, that there are serious financial barriers to finishing teaching. One that often comes up is specifically around student teaching, that again, if you're having to work through college, it can be difficult to work around really this cornerstone of traditional teacher preparation programs. So again, something that some universities are starting to experiment for, just much more robust financial support for those who are considering becoming teachers. Much more on the short term, though, I think there's a number of more strategic or targeted hiring practices that have also been recommended by recent research. And one of the first here is around just taking steps to identify staffing needs really early in the hiring cycle. From previous research before the pandemic, we even find that it's around 20% of new teachers that are hired after the school year begins. And this has the potential for a lot of, again, negative downstream effects, the worst of which, again, see these teachers being much more likely to leave. But lots of this just relates to, again, either on the school side or the teacher side of not being able to really tell if they really fit with the school. Again, if the hiring process is late, if it's rushed, of not being really able to understand this. Again, so when possible, taking steps to identify staffing needs earlier in the hiring cycle. Another one that I know districts increasingly use just through conversations, but it's one we really don't have any evidence. I think it's an area that's ripe for future research, and that's around targeted job advertising. Again, just how well through social media in particular can target jobs to particular groups, whether this is in terms of geographic location, educational background, or previous professional experience. Another potential way to really target those who might be interested in coming into work in a school. The joke we make in Fuller sometimes around this point of, like, again, if that hiring cycle starting in March, if we're able to do ads in like Minnesota or much colder climates to really say there might be worth coming south when the winter wears on in colder places. But again, I think whether this, otherwise, we see that even for teachers that do graduate from teacher preparation programs, that it's not all that necessarily will immediately come into teaching, that there is potentially a group that may be out there that, again, even has necessary training and certification, but to this point hasn't become teachers. And if there's ways that this can be better targeted. But again, I see this as in some ways pretty exploratory. I don't think we have strong empirical evidence, but definitely one for an area of experimentation, and as I had said, for need for additional research. The other two relate to student teaching. I think often from a district vantage, it's often sometimes, again, needing to have these high degree of connections with teacher preparation programs. One that seems to have the potential, at least, to be impactful is really trying to work more proactively to recruit student teachers to really meet needs within districts. Again, maybe this is around particular schools, particular subject areas, whatever it might look like in the local context. But increasingly finding that the schools that teachers seem attracted to are ones that they've had experience in. Again, either even back to the research that I had done, this may be similar to where you went to high school, again, or maybe it's just similar to where you did your student teaching. You're just aware of sort of how things run in schools, either at a certain level or serving certain types of students, that this seems to be impactful for where teachers like to begin their career. And then I think even beyond that, when possible, if there's ways to place new teachers in schools similar to where they had conducted their student teaching. Again, we do see this as another predictor of retention. If where students are teaching is similar to where they had done their student teaching, it's just probably an easier transition in and result in much less likely to leave. So then shifting over to the retention side. I think often the first step, I know this is increasingly common in districts in Florida, is either to rely on recruitment bonuses and then increasingly for retention bonuses as well. And this is one I think we have fairly strong empirical evidence that they do seem to, again, help with recruiting or retaining teachers either in high need subjects, for teachers in hard to staff schools. There's also some research maybe around late career retention bonuses. Again, for this latter one, maybe if we can incentivize teachers who are retirement eligible just to stay for a few more years, maybe this is more cost effective than just simply relying on hiring new teachers that might be more likely to leave. Sort of overall, I think when I think about financial incentives, really see these as I think sort of a reasonable first step. I don't think there's any reason to expect them to completely alleviate some of the really deep staffing challenges as we've been talking about, but I think can really help to start to drill in. For most of these, as I'll be talking about, I think there's a number of caveats. I think the big one here is that we see that the design really matters for incentive programs. There's a district in our state, this is an example on the recruitment bonus side. Whenever they have their recruitment bonuses in turnaround schools, it always just seems to wreak havoc in other schools in the district. Just based on the timing of when turnaround schools are announced, after school grades come out in the summer. Again, maybe it leads to a lot of really high quality teachers moving to turnaround schools where there's a high degree of support. At the same time, it can lead other principals in the district in a pinch as teachers are moving really close to the start of the school year. Again, so I think there's a lot of potential here around recruitment and retention bonuses, but really being cognizant of how those are designed. The second one, and I think really important then, is around improving teacher working conditions. And I think there's a number of different ways that this can take place. I think that one of the big difficulties here is this often falls on the shoulders of principals, who we know are often just overworked with all that they're having to take on within their schools. The first, I think there's some and then growing evidence that principal professional development or talent management, as Dr. Gates hopefully will speak to a little bit in her presentation, can relate to improved reduced teacher turnover, particularly over time. Again, if we're working to develop principles, particularly as being able to working with teachers, that maybe this is a way to reduce teacher turnover. And part of the reason for this is often, and we see from qualitative research, that teachers' both professional needs, they vary quite a bit. And it can be really difficult, often even from a district level, to be sufficiently customized in terms of how we're supporting teachers' various needs that might arise. And often it's principals who are best positioned to be able to do this. I think this is difficult work, even using the example of new teacher induction. Often we, again, have really fleshed out much more comprehensive new teacher induction, new teacher mentoring programs. At the same time, teachers' needs may vary tremendously when they are starting out. Even using the example of alternatively certified teachers. It can be very different if you've been, again, working within the field compared to if you're just coming in, don't even have a sense for the language that's used to talk about, say, instructional priorities in the school. I've had a recent conversation with a doctoral student in one of our programs who had left after working for a few years as an alternatively certified teacher, and she was talking about how, like, just the first few weeks of school, she just felt completely lost with all the jargon that was used, all the acronyms that were used. Like, even base level communication was difficult getting going at the start of the school year for her. Again, just to really drive home how the types of supports that, again, teachers might require can be really varied. This might vary across the full experience continuum. There's been a longstanding emphasis on the need for some form of career ladders. Again, those can be defined in various ways, but maybe this looks like teacher leadership opportunities for more senior teachers. Maybe this looks like having opportunities to take on instructional coaching roles, or when they are available, even participating in research practice partnerships to really be able to, again, make your contribution to your students, but then also perhaps a broader contribution to your school as well. It can vary across other groups of teachers. I think one that we've seen an increasing interest in is having affinity groups across districts for teachers of color, really recognizing that the experience might be unique and the supports that this group of teachers needs might be unique and really needs to be catered to as well. Miami-Dade County Public Schools has even gone as far as having cross-district affinity groups for male teachers of color as a particular group that they really want to support the transition into teaching. Again, all to drive home, I think, this really important point that while there's a really high-level way that we want to improve working conditions, support teachers, that often the needs that teachers have can be quite unique too, and really trying to find ways to address those. And then to that point, another tool that's suggested by the broader management literature, I haven't actually heard of any school or district that's experimented with it, but the idea of using mid-year retention surveys. Most districts are at a spot where you use exit surveys, again, finding why teachers have left. But I think it's telling that we don't use retention surveys that really get at questions of, okay, asking teachers just straight out, do you plan to be here in a year? Why or why not? Are there ways that you feel like you could be better supported that would make you more likely to stay? What are some additional resources that you need? Again, I think is an important step to give principals additional information about how then they can better customize, better support teachers within their school. Again, I think the big caveats here, I think there are some questions about whether this should be anonymous, if teachers feel like they wouldn't answer honestly. Also, what we hear even from end-of-year working condition surveys, that teachers often don't feel like they are honest on these. If they feel like they're answering a survey that's linked to their email, feel like administrator might be looking to see if they are saying something negative about them or their school. So I think serious questions about trust there. But again, I think at least the potential to explore this is another means to try to offer more tailored retention programs for teachers. As I had said at the start, though, I think These types of very technical approaches are important to try to really get at some of the more management-related challenges that do exist in terms of teacher staffing, again, whether that's on the recruitment or the retention side. At the same time, I don't want to lose track of this bigger picture of how we can really create teaching conditions that are supportive of current teachers, but also attractive to new teachers. And I think this can involve deeper shifts in how we frame teacher staffing. Ultimately, I think if our focus is only on, okay, what do we do to not have teachers leave? I think that sets a pretty low bar for us. I think we need to set a little bit higher of an expectation about how we're actually, again, trying to build conditions for teachers where teachers want to stay. Again, I think this is the spot we want to go to, again, not only focus on why teachers leave, but really focus more on why teachers stay. And there's a couple reasons for this. First, I think it centers our attention on the majority of teachers. As you can recall from the figure that I had started with, looking at the rate of turnover throughout the past few years, it was only about 13% of teachers who are turning over. That means, again, from one year to the next, it's an overwhelming majority who are staying in their schools. And if we're not really focused on this group of teachers, I think it, again, misses a really big opportunity about who we're really targeting our energy and support around, rather than always focusing just, I think, narrowly on those who left. Second, I think it shifts our frame to a little bit more of an asset-based framing. I think increasingly as educators, we're looking for ways we can move away from deficit-based framing when we're talking about students and their families. But I think it's also really appropriate to apply that to teachers as well. Again, so rather than characterizing the teacher workforce and public schools through the challenges that are faced, again, really asking the important question about why people became a teacher in the first place, and why are you staying? What is it about the teaching profession that is really keeping you here? And often, I think these are the stories that are sometimes overlooked that we want to be sure that we are holding up. And then the last piece, I think it can distract from the growing evidence base on what we do actually see working. But more broadly, I think there's even, again, this moral question of just how we really value, how we consider teachers. And if, again, we're just focusing on the negative qualities here, if this distracts from, again, some of these deeper questions about, again, that there are a lot of things that teachers really do draw value from about, again, why they became teachers and what keeps them there. So to try to unpack this just a little bit more, first, if we're focusing on why teachers stay, obviously the natural place to start is the school-based conditions that relate to that. First is in terms of questions about just fit or compatibility with their school. So a question like, how do a teacher's personal values align with the values and mission of their school? This touches on deeper questions, though, about, again, I think, in the pandemic, coming out of it, we do hear these questions about, like, do teachers feel like they're sufficiently valued given their societal contribution? Do they feel heard in their schools? Do they feel like they're getting the supports that they need to be successful? Here I'm reminded of Susan Moore Johnson's great aphorism around, like, what teachers are really looking for is a sense of success. They want to be working in schools where they feel like they have the resources, supports to be successful. Again, if we're focusing then on questions of fit, I think this is where it can center where we're talking about. It also relates to this previous discussion about retention, though. Again, if our focus is on retention, how does this change how we might hire? Are we asking different questions that we feel like is going to better match teachers and schools? Again, to the point about retention surveys, are we really focused not only around why teachers are leaving, but really try to ask, like, what are the things you need to be successful? What are the things that you need that might make you more likely to both stay in teaching, but also stay here at this school? The second one here on school-based factors really relates to the social conditions of teachers' work. How well connected is a teacher to other educators in their school? And here what we often what we often hear teachers talking about is just the importance of their relationships with their colleagues, that this is just a huge form of support that teachers often draw on. So are we creating opportunities for genuine connection between teachers? Often this takes on a deeper spot for teachers as they, again, develop in their career of taking on new roles and responsibilities. Ultimately, it's, again, when teachers are working in schools where they feel like they have a rich bed of connections, where they feel like they're deeply involved in just the day-to-day management of the school. These are things that anchor teachers in their school. These are things that make it harder to leave. And then lastly, there's a certain element of sacrifice, or what would be lost if I left my current teaching position. Here often, I think importantly, this is material loss. Again, can be defrayed if the salary that I'm making is comparable than, say, other neighboring districts or other jobs outside of education. But importantly, it's not only financial, that there's a certain psychological piece here as well. Like, am I deeply embedded? Am I committed to working in my school? Again, do I have the supports that have really had me be successful as ways to, again, that just leaving would be more difficult. And then often in education, our focus has really been on, okay, how can we change the conditions of schools, which is obviously really important. This is what we have the largest control over. Research outside of education really points to the importance not only of, again, school-based or more with our employers, but community-based conditions as well. But here's some of these same ideas of, again, how well I fit, what social connections I have, the degree of sacrifice applied. Questions like, does the teacher think of the community where they live as home? Do they have family roots in the community? What would a teacher lose by changing their teaching job or moving elsewhere? And then again, while we often think of these community-based factors as just outside of our control as educators, I think it's important to remember that schools are often central social institutions. Again, whether this is teachers' involvement in sports, say fundraising, or other school-based community service, like these can all serve to help embed teachers in the broader community, again, building the type of communities that we might want to have to really support teachers. At the same time, I do want to emphasize, again, starting to wrap up, this focus on the reasons teachers stay isn't meant to discount the high levels of stress, burnout, dissatisfaction that are currently experienced by teachers. If anything, I really see these as, should be seen as warning bells by educational leaders, really point to the need to proactively support the work environments of teachers. Again, needing to attend more explicitly to the working conditions to make teaching a more fulfilling job. So then to start to wrap up, I think it's simply too low of a bar if all we're really working towards as educational leaders is to reduce turnover. I think obviously that's an important, often when we're faced with really immediate staffing challenges, these are the types of things that we need to focus on in the short term. But I think we need to set our vision a little bit broader than that. I think we really need to think about, focus on the reasons why teachers are staying in their job and really make meaningful steps to build on the success. So this is where we want to see, okay, well, why are you a teacher? What do you like about it? What are the things that could be provided to be able to do your job better? What do you really need to be successful? Importantly, I think this is, again, can really help get at this question that I had started the presentation with of, again, not only why certain people are going to stay or leave, but also to try to support the pipeline, to really get at this question of why some might be interested in becoming and really would consider committing their lives to the work of teaching. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I'm very excited to hear any questions or comments that you all have at this point. So thank you all.